Alright, so about Chrono as a quickness provider, it's kind of simplistic in a way that you only have three sources of quickness. So you have either the well, so the quickness well over here. You have time warp, and then you have your shatters. Everything else is supplementary to making this like basically these three quickness sources activate themselves. So for quickness chrono, whenever you shatter, so whenever you press one of your F keys, you see it's going to give quickness around you in a circle. You see this small circle here. Now, small common misinterpretation, it does not, when you have extra clones, it does not give the quickness around the clones, it only gives it around yourself. And the duration of each shatter is going to extend based on how many clones you shatter. So, the next up is Well of Action. Well of Action is a simple, you press it and then it's going to give quickness. However, there is a catch also on this, is that it only gives the quickness when it expires. So for example, I'm going to cast it off me and I'm going to walk into it. Once this expires, you see, now I have the quickness. So this is usually non-relevant because on a permanent uptime on the boss situation, you're just going to have quickness already. But do be careful when you start a fight and then you cast it a quickness. Be aware that you're not going to immediately be providing the quickness to your group. Then next up is Signet of Inspiration. Signet of Inspiration is a bit unique in a way that it does not give quickness. So if I press it here, it does not give me any quickness. Let's go into the rating instance. Instead, what it does is if you have quickness already on people that are around you, it's going to extend that quickness. So let's give it I'm going to cast Well of Alacrity. And then once it expires, you see here, I'm going to press it. You see it adds 3 seconds to that timer on whichever boon you have already. Right? So it is not limited to quickness. However, it is a very good source of quickness when you already have quickness. Next up is Tides of Time. Tides of Time is a shield skill. So basically, it is the shield 5, Tides of Time. When you throw it out, it gives quickness. When it comes back, it gives alacrity. Right? So this is really rarely used for quickness. However, it is an extra source of quickness if you need it. Now, something that is not mentioned here, but mentioned previously, is Time Warp. Reason why Time Warp is not mentioned as a quickness source, although it is a very good quickness source in itself, is the reason that if you need CC, this can be replaced. This is not part of your core build. And if you need other things, this is something that you will remove for other things. So, for example, Gravity Well, if you need extra CC, or if you need Mass in this, you can use this here like this. Right. So it is not necessary to the build, so it will not be listed here, but do note that Time Warp is a source of quickness. Right. Then for the 2 trait lights, Domination and Dueling, and Domination and Inspiration. The difference between the two is as simply put as in here. Domination Dueling would be the default to the build is because of the reason of having more DPS. But if you need the necessary utility, you will take Domination Inspiration instead. So when I say better quickness uptime, as mentioned before, you would only ever take Signet of Inspiration if you play with the Inspiration trait line. Because what it does is when you have it, you have this trait here, which when traded will make Signet of Inspiration 10 people. So you see on Signet of Inspiration, it says number of targets 5 currently, but if I click this, now it says 10, right? So now it's going to hit the entire squad instead of just your subgroup. So it is generally speaking really useful, as well as whenever you cast a Signet, it's going to share Aegis. So when you have when you have Signet, you cast it, you're going to gain Distortion. You're going to gain Distortion, Distortion being this little thing here. And whenever you gain Distortion, this trait activates. So when it says grant Aegis to all nearby allies, whenever you give yourself Distortion, use Shatter skill 4. Right? So by doing this, you can also have one source of Aegis to your own subgroup, which might not sound like much, but it could become necessary in boss fights such as Deimos, for example, where you have to Aegis a Pizza Slam or you have to Aegis a Mind Crush in order to actually not straight up wipe the group. And those are the 2 main types of builds on Quickness Chrono. And to reemphasize, by default, you would run Domination Dueling, but whenever you need something, you would run Domination Inspiration instead. So here we have basically a list of the things that I mentioned before. I forgot this slide existed. Some extra stuff here is use Phantasms on cooldown for DPS and for quickness. This is based on Chrono or Mesmer as a core class. So when what I mean by this is when previously mentioned that your quickness is based around you spawning clones, the idea and concept is that you have clone skill. So you see this skill as a clone written on the very front. What it does is really simple. It spawns one clone, which extends when shattered, extends the time. Then you have phantasm skills, which are not exactly clones, but what it does is it's going to spawn this phantasm that does its attack, but once the attack is done, it's going to turn into a clone, which grants us effectively quickness, extra quickness. So by juggling between these two types of skills, you want to spawn as much clones in the end as possible for you to like feed your shatters so that you have quickness generation from these. For the trait lines, the seize the moment is absolutely necessary to your rotation. The reason for this is because this is what makes your clones give quickness when you shatter. From a trait line perspective, it's this trait over here, so on the very bottom of the Chronomancer and on the middle row. And everything else is more or less an support or DPS trait. Although improved alacrity is also relevant, that makes your alacrity be 50% faster recharge instead of 25%, which might be relevant to your rotation depending on if you take it or not. For domination trait line, it is rather simple DPS trait line. Most of these traits that you would take in this trait line is a DPS gain for yourself. However, there is something that needs to be spoken of, and it's this trait here. All right. Between these two traits, you would take this trait by default because it makes your illusions do more damage. But whenever you run Greatsword, so these skills, you would take this trait because what this does is instead of spawn this skill here, instead of spawning one clone, it's going to make the attack spawn two clones, as you see. So it's going to do two of the attacks, and then both of them turns into clone. So it is a straight extra generation of quickness because it spawns one extra clone, which is also a DPS boost on a side effect. But it is really important to take this when you're running Greatsword. So for dueling, it is again a straight DPS trait. It is actually really default in the sense that it does just gives you DPS, extra DPS to you whenever you pick the correct traits from here. Inspiration, as mentioned before, is a trait that you almost always solely take for this button here because it makes your signals of inspiration stronger. So if you ever need signals of inspiration, you would take illusions. Sorry, not illusions, inspiration trait line. And as for some other relevant stuff, this might become relevant if you tank Kadim the Peerless specifically, where the boss has a lot of vulnerability that provides to you. And this really helps you with the vulnerability control. Other than that, these other traits in here, the selection doesn't really matter which one you take. They don't really change your gameplay whatsoever. Then for utility skills. As mentioned before, Well of Action, always take it. The reason why you always take it is because currently the build that you require includes this one as a quickness source. So if you ever need to drop it, you're going to need to take a lot more of boon duration instead of what you normally would run. And because of this, it is recommended that you just straight up don't drop it, even if you need to switch out a trait or something. So for example, if I need a utility, I would remove this one, and then I would remove this one, and then I would remove this one as an absolute last resort. Then for Seize the Moment, as mentioned before, never drop it because it is what makes this build tick. It is required for this build. And yeah, requirements for playing Inspiration as the trait line as a whole is if you run Inspiration, it is almost always by default you will run the Signet of Inspiration as well. The reason for this is because this entire trait line is basically like a bundle with this one button because it doesn't do anything else except make this one stronger. If you want extra DPS, by default, you would run Signet of Ether. Where basically what Signet of Ether does is it resets your Phantasm skills specifically. So any skill that says Phantasm on the front, once you've casted it, you're gonna cast your heal skill. It's gonna refund the cooldown to you immediately back. Phantasm of Disenchant is a strong DPS skill. It is generally speaking unnecessary as a quickness providing thing. However, it is a phantasm as well, so it does translate into more clones. It is, however, generally speaking, a default skill if you do not need the utility slot for anything else. Mantra of Pain is a DPS skill. So if you ever don't need any extra traits, utility slots for anything else, this would be your average setup for the day. However, if between these three skills, if you ever need something else, for example, stability for your subgroup, or cleansing, or a CC, extra CC, Mantra of Pain is the first skill you switch out because that is the thing you lose the least out of by switching out. Some other utilities, as mentioned before, Mantra of Concentration gives stability to 5 people, so your subgroup. Mantra of Distraction is our break bar damage skill that is instacast and kinda helpful if you are really struggling with CC. Right, next up, for gearing, this would be the default gear for quickness, as you can see here. This is based on Snowcross, it will be linked below. As you can see, or if you're not very certain, there is not a single bit of boon duration in this build. It is the boon duration, so this number here is quite literally 0. Right? Because of this, Quickness Chrono, how much quickness you provide is directly related to how well you do your rotation. So if you cannot basically do a pitch perfect rotation on Power Boon Chrono, it is recommended that you do not play this build and you play a build that has extra boon duration to basically give you an extra safety net for your quickness uptime. This is a build that I believe Felix came up with, and generally speaking, it runs Diviner Pieces, which gives more concentration, which helps you with boon duration. It also believe, never mind, it does not, and I also believe it runs, Concentration Sigil, which gives you 10% boon duration by default. If you notice, I do not run the Diviner Pieces. However, I personally run the boon duration sigil by default because I believe that is something I would require. So it is actually quite difficult to do the chrono rotation pitch perfect without dropping any boons with no boon duration extra. Now, then moving forward for the weapon choices, you have, generally speaking, 3 choices with this current patch. You will almost always be running Greatsword because Greatsword is a great quickness generation weapon set. Mostly because of the reason is that it generates the most amount of clones on itself. You have 2 skills. You have a 5-second cooldown thing that generates 1 clone, and you have a 12-second thing that generates 2 clones. And it is, generally speaking, really insane for quickness. This is why this weapon is almost always used. For default, your default, when you don't need anything else other than DPS and quickness, you would run Sword. The reason for this is because this is the highest DPS weapon sets, and as mentioned before, if you don't need anything else, don't take anything else. Then, if you need focus, so for ad control, focus being this one here for ad control is really insane as a skill. The reason for it is because it is the only skill that's a pull, and you can cast it somewhere else other than on yourself. So for example, if I need to control the ads over there, group it together there, I will cast it there, and then I will cast it, and they will all get pulled in that exact spot, instead of, unlike most skills, where they would pull right under you. So there is a huge variety of control on how you can use this skill. And because of this, very commonly, you are by default the ad control person in the composition. So if you need to control ads, you're going to need to run Sword Focus, Greatsword. If you need to tank a boss, that has hard-hitting attacks, you would run Sword, Shield, Greatsword. And the reason for this is because, again, Greatsword is a great quickness generation skill, and Shield is something that you would use for a heavy-hitting attack. Reason why Shield is a heavy-hitting attack, for heavy-hitting attack, is also because of why Chrono is a default tank to most pugs. And that is because Shield 4 is a channel block that is basically really strong. Because of this, just being a channel block, basically you are basically immune to most attacks during this channel, and because of it, Shield is a really strong defensive tool. However, it does not really provide anything else other than that defensive capability. So if you don't need defensive capabilities, you would not take it. Now, something not mentioned here is if you need a hard-hitting attack to be blocked, as well as you need to control ads, you would run Sword, Shield, Sword, Focus instead. So basically, you drop the Greatsword as a very, very last resort. Generally speaking, there is no boss that you would actually require to run like that. However, if you feel insecure on some bosses, which are dangerous but just not hard-hitting, you can run Sword, Shield, Sword, Focus. Right. So as a general guideline for Quickness Chrono, the upsides for it is again Temporal Curtain. So Focus 4 as the pull is the best pull in the game. Period. There is no contest between anything else, and is very flexible in regards of builds. So if your squad needs something as a secondary, you can probably provide it. So if you need extra CC, you can provide it. If you need stability, you can provide it. If you need condition classes, you can also provide it. So generally speaking, it's really helpful, as well as it's got feedback, which is sometimes relevant for specific mechanics. But generally speaking, it's got everything in a whole package. The downsides of this is that it's got lower damage than its competitors, which is Quickness, Firebrand, and Scrapper. And on top of that, it also provides no fury, unlike Quickbrand, in which case you cannot run two chronos for quickness only without needing someone else to go out of their way to provide fury for their own subgroup. And on top of that, as mentioned before, the Snowcross build is really, really hard to play and by not dropping quickness. And lastly, as mentioned before, the rotation you do, how well you do it, directly resembles to how much quickness you provide. All right. So general rotation rule, well of action off cooldown, because it's in your utility sets, you will always have access to it. Whenever you have 3 clones, you want to shatter. So when I say 3 clone, you see these dots on top. Those are each representing a clone. So when I spawn a clone, that's gonna fill up, and then that's gonna count with 1 extra quickness pulse for each clone. And use F2 whenever you don't have clones for additional quickness. What this means is that you want to use your clones for F1 for damage, but whenever you have the chance, you can shatter your shatters for extra quickness. So what this means in like execution is that right after I shatter F1, I will shatter F2. So that I know I won't use any clones for F2, but I still get the 1 second quickness out of it. If you play Inspiration, you would play the Signet. And if you have the Signet, as mentioned before, you would cast it off cooldown, but only after you've gotten quickness. So generally speaking, to guarantee it, I would personally, generally speaking, I would cast it, and then during it, I would be F1ing or using whatever F1 shatter, so that I know I will have quickness on the group, and then that's the Signet goes off and then extends it by 3 seconds. Now, the important part about Chrono is to not overstay in your weapons. The reason for this is because you need to constantly be spawning clones, otherwise your quickness is going to suffer from the amount of clones that you cannot generate for your shatters, so you can't sustain it. For example, like this, I'm going to use this. Look at this. By the time the F1 comes back off cooldown, I don't have any clones ready for it. Like I have 1, I have 2, and that's it. Like I can't keep up quickness like this, and because of that, it is really important for you to basically change weapon sets at all times so that you have the extra clones available to you that gets spawned. And also on a side demonstration, as you can see, why Greatsword is a great weapon, because it generates so much clones, right? So here I would only be going into the this weapon set as an off chance, so that I can basically get my clones and then I leave immediately. So I will not stay in one weapon set because I know for a fact that I will suffer from quickness loss. So if you're not certain of the perfect rotation, so-called perfect rotation, there's a good guideline for the weapon sets you do. So depending on which weapons you take, it might differ slightly, but the overall, it follows a concept of basically splitting the two weapon sets into two different parts. So on Greatsword, I would always do Greatsword 4, and then I'm going to wait for the Greatsword 4, cast it again, and I'm going to leave Greatsword. So if you want to look at the weapon swap cooldown when I go into Greatsword, and then look on why that is relevant. So cast Greatsword, and then I'm going to do this, right? And then you look at the weapon set swap. Once it's gonna come off, I'm gonna Greatsword 4, and then I'm gonna leave, right? So by doing this, I know for a fact I'm not overstaying, because simply put, the Greatsword 4 cooldown lines up with the weapon swap cooldown. And then on sword, any sword set, right? So any sword set, how you do it is you always cast 5, and then you cast 2. And you, based on this 2 cooldown, you're simply going to cast it again and then leave, right? So I'm going to cast it now, and then I'm going to leave the sword. So to re-emphasize the summary, 2 Greatsword 4s and then leave Greatsword, 2 Sword 2s and then leave Sword. Basically, you can go on overall like that. And then between these skills, you're only going to cast everything else and do whatever you want. Generally speaking, you can freestyle it. For the opener, generally speaking, it is really similar to the loop. However, it takes into account continuous split. Continuous split being F4. F4 has a unique case where, like, it's kind of like whenever you do something in F4, it's going to refund the skill when it ends. See, now I get it back. And because of this, the idea is that you go into F4, dump all your skills, and then once it ends, you dump all your skills again, right? So basically, you get refunded value out of it. So because of that, the general recommendation is that you get 2 clones first. Those clones being with the opener is Illusion, this Sword 3, and then Greatsword 2, right? Now you have 2 clones, and then now you're gonna go Greatsword 4, and then you're just gonna dump all your skills, right? And then you're gonna, don't forget to press your F keys, and then now you're gonna dump your skills again, right? And then now you're done with the opener. This is the opener. That's it. Okay. So it has, again, a really distinct way where you can squeeze out absolutely everything, but you can also freestyle this by simply throwing all your skills out before your continuous split ends. Right. So as a summary, new to Chrono players, play Inspiration because it gives you a more leeway to screwing up, and then people won't notice it because of how you have more boon duration, as well as you have the extra 3 seconds generation that you can basically do sandbagging with. So if you screw something up, you have 3 seconds leeway to not have it be noticed. For quickness, shatter F1 whenever you have 3 clones, and use Wall of Action of cooldown. Those are your 2 biggest quickness skills. And then for here, always use Time Warp at the beginning of a phase. Then use Time Warp in a continuous split every time you do it. So if I do a normal opener, pay attention to when I get my first set of quickness. So now I'm gonna do the opener. Pay attention to when the group would get quickness, right? Now is the first sort of quickness. So you have an effective 3-second gap at the very beginning if you do a normal opener. And because of this, it is always almost recommended to start off with time warp right before everything, so that you can ignore that, right? So if I do, instead of doing what I just did, I do time warp first and then go into the opener. As you can see, everybody gets quickness right from the get-go, and nobody is like basically sad, right? So because of this, time warp is a luxury that helps you with the quickness at the beginning of phases, after which it doesn't really matter for quickness uptime. However, it's helpful as a value cast, which is why you want to put it into your continuous split so that you can cast it twice. And lastly, play focus whenever there's ads that you need to pull, because when there is ads that you need to pull, you're in charge of pulling almost always, for obvious reasons. Being focus 4 is broken. Right, that will be it for the chrono part of this presentation. Are there any questions?